know what really makes us mad is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we choose one year at random and select one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from this year to discuss. And this week, we are joined by Gordon Phillips of the band Downhaul. They have a brand new record coming out this Friday, September 20th. The record is called How to Begin, and you can get a copy of it from Self-Aware Records as well as Land Cole Portage. Yeah, this is a really, really fun conversation. What are we talking about today?
We are talking about the year 2005, and the album is Commit This to Memory by Motion City Soundtrack. This is a big deal for us.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked around this record a lot over the years. I'm really glad someone finally picked it.
Yeah, we do. We so often will skip over these big records that like mean a lot to us, and then for some reason we don't ever choose them for ourselves to discuss. But I'm really glad we had a guest talk about it, because if it's just you and me, we would just be like, it's real good, and that's it. So really glad to get Gordon's perspective on his approach, when he found this band and all this good stuff. So it's a really fun conversation. I enjoyed quite a bit of it. If you head over to patreon.com/punklautopod, for $1, you get access to all of our weekly bonus audio. Last week, we did an I'm Listening, where we talked about the albums we listened to over the previous month. And we also have a new $5 tier. This is our producer/listening club tier. And what you get with that is you get your name set on the show as a producer every single week. And then you get to join us for a monthly Zoom or Skype group chat where we discuss an album. And for our very first edition of the Listening Club, we're going to discuss Bad Religion's The Gray Race. So if you're part of this Patreon tier, that means listen to the record and join us for a group discussion on it. And not sure how it's going to go. I'm excited to get into it, but it'll be a new thing for us to try out. And then you could join at the $10 tier. For a one-time $10 donation, you get to choose the album we devote an entire episode to. We got a couple of those lined up in the future as well. We're going to do those on the other side of our 300th episode, which will be next week. So before we get into the show, let's shout out our producers. So up first, we have Dave Brown, host of the podcast One Band, Five Songs, as well as writer of the blog Oklahoma Lefty, longtime friend of the show. And I recently guested on some bonus audio for Dave for One Band, Five Songs, where we talked about the Iron Chic discography and rated all of their albums. We also want to shout out our producer, Steve Long. He is the host of the podcast Rebel Rock Radio, as well as Radio Unfriendly, another good friend of the show. We have Jason W., the writer of the newsletter Songs About Chocolate and Girls, where he goes alphabetically through punk records of the 90s. I believe, what letter are we up to with Songs About Chocolate and Girls? Are we in the D's still?
I think he's in the D's.
Yeah. Really fun Substack. Check that out. And our final producer, Phillips Brooks, he sponsored our episode on 10-Yard Fight and then signed up for our $5 tier. So thank you all so much for being producers on this show. And if you're interested in that, it's patreon.com/punklautopod. And let's get into the show. Enjoy this conversation with Gordon of Downhaul.
That shit takes time, but the water pressure's nice. Or it was that night. Still don't feel right. I bet you've known it your whole life, but we toe the line. It's all the same. If it's all the same, why really bother? Someone to blame, so you fan the flame, one to another.
So we are joined here today with Gordon Phillips of the band Downhaul. Gordon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
thank you for doing it. We have some mutual friends in common, and buddy friend of the show, Josh Robbins is of Spinning Out and Software Records has put me in connection with you, and looking forward to this little conversation. So, welcome to the show, and let's get into it. So, Downhaul has a new record coming out the week this episode drops. So, this episode will drop on Wednesday. The album, I believe, comes out on Friday, and it is called How to Begin, and it will be released on Software Records and Land Colportage. And it's early, obviously. You haven't had a chance to get too much feedback, but how do you feel about the new record?
Great question. And this is the only interview so far, so this is kind of the time to test out all the questions and all the answers. I feel good about the record. We've done 4 singles, which is more than we've ever done before, and people have been very positive and very kind about those. So, hopefully they like the rest of the record, and we had a good time making it. We loved playing it, which was a big touchstone for us. And can't wait to see what people think of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to it, and what I've heard from it, I really enjoyed, and I think it's your best record yet.
Thank you.
I went through all of them this week just to kind of, get a feel for all of them and just to see how they go. And I really, really like the direction of this new record. Your last record, it was called Proof, and it's a little darker, a little bit more atmospheric, I guess. And this record feels a lot more kind of like not stripped down, but like reduced down to like a more just kind of here's the basics of the group.
Yeah.
Was that like a conscious choice?
Yeah, that's an astute observation. We really wanted this album to sound a lot like the band, so there's very minimal overdubs. The mix on it is very minimal. There's not a ton of layering. There's, we use all our own gear, which is something that people don't always do in the recording studio. Sometimes you get there and you see all this nice stuff and you want to use it. But it was really a big priority for us that the new album sound like our band. And I think we effectuated that pretty well. And Proof definitely had a lot of production, a lot of bells and whistles, a lot of layering. It was kind of post-rocky. It was kind of, ambient in a lot of ways. And I love it. I think it came out exactly how we wanted to. But I think part of, at least for me, one of the fun things about being in a band is tinkering and switching things up and growing and the things you like changing. And that's how we kind of arrived at the overall approach for this one.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the idea of getting in the studio and having all this equipment that you don't normally use, and then how that could eventually change how the record comes together. That's something I don't really think about too much, but it's definitely a realistic thing.
Yeah.
You feel like you're paying for it, and you feel like you need to put it to use.
Yeah, you think, oh, this is so much nicer than my stuff. I should go ahead and use it, or we should really, into the classic rhythm guitar treatment is the stereo pair, one down each side. And then you listen to some records and they've got 2 down each side. And then some have a layer of clean guitar on top of that. And it's easy to get carried away because then you start thinking, oh, I don't want to have all these rhythm guitar layers be the same setup. So I'm going to use this guitar for that one and that amp for that one. But on this album, there is just one rhythm guitar layer, my guitar, my amp, my pedals going down the left pan, stereo pair left. And that was very different to have it kind of be so bare and such a take, really, instead of kind of layering and editing and quantizing and making sure it's all locked in, just kind of keeping it a lot more raw.
Yeah, it definitely comes across more live. This is the version of the band that I can imagine seeing live instead of the last record. You probably pulled some of that. I haven't seen you guys live, so I don't know exactly how you pull it off, but would probably take more work live to pull that off.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You should come see us at the Milestone on the 21st. It's Saturday. But and that was a big thing because we made that album and there's drum machines, there's synth players, there's different guitars doing different things. And when we went to kind of relearn it to play it live, we were sort of having to plan out how we were going to do it. Who's going to fire off this sound, and do we want to mess with a sampler or a keyboard or things like that? But with this record, it really is, we set up and we play the songs, and we wanted that to be kind of at the forefront from a production standpoint and an arrangement standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, the record is fantastic. So how did you wind up working with Josh and Sarah at Self-Aware for this one? Because you've done refresh records in the past for your previous albums.
Yep. Josh and Sarah, we've been playing shows with forever. Every time, we play with All Right or Faye or Late Bloomer. And right before the record was kind of finished, there was a Late Bloomer show in Richmond that we played. And in the lead up, in setting up that show, Josh and I had been in touch about, can you guys play the show? Yeah. What about this? What about that? And then I sent Josh the record, and Josh was kind of like, we can put this out if you want. I was like, oh, that wasn't really my intention. I was kind of just sharing it among friends. And I was like, really? And Josh said, yeah, let me talk to Sarah. Sarah's the real boss around here. And if Sarah likes it, we'll see what we can do. And ended up working out, and they've been awesome just to work with. They're both real rockers, which is what I say about them. They love music. They love playing it. They love going to shows. They love listening to it. They love nerding out about it. But it is rare, at least in my experience, that you have people running a record label who are very familiar with kind of the other side. Sometimes there's people who used to be in bands, or people who, manage bands or things like that, running labels. But Josh and Sarah are really, in the thick of it, playing in bands and touring and making albums. And they're both they're great at running a label too. They're very organized, communicative. They get you everything you need right when you ask for it. They've been really great to work with from an administrative side as well.
Yeah, I like the idea of Josh being like, oh, I love it. We should put it out, but I got to talk to Sarah first. And then if he came back later and was like, I think it's no go. You'd be like, oh.
That'd be hilarious. Just see her shows. No, it's very, it's funny that like he kind of framed it that way, but I'm sure they come to agreement on everything that they, do and don't work on. Yeah.
They're so impressive. Like the project they've been working on this year with those singles a month, or like crazy. Some of them are EPs. Yeah. Just like a new version of them together, like over and over again. It's wild how they can do, looks like any style of music.
Yeah. When we were plotting out the timeline for our record, Josh says, well, Sarah and I have something coming out this day and this day and this day and this day and this day. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, and they're all different genres or projects or sounds, and so we're gonna have that going on. And I was like, oh, okay. And then sure enough, they went and did it, kind of songwriting adventure together. But yeah, really cool, really high quality, high standard of work.
So for y'all with this album, you mentioned online, and I think it's some of the press release type stuff, that you have the campfire test, which I think is a really cool idea. Explain that to the listeners, what you mean by that.
Sure. So in the past, I have been so I'm still like pretty new to songwriting. I kind of wrote my first songs in the beginning of this band. So like 2016, 2017, I'm still trying to like learn what works best for me. And I've kind of gone about it a bunch of different ways. But in the past, I've been very inclined to kind of like a sound, I want this album to sound a certain way. And Proof was kind of that taken to the nth. What can we do in terms of ambiance and atmosphere and vibe and mood? And I was really keyed into those things, and writing with a bunch of guitar pedals, and that whole album is on baritone guitar, and messing around with soundscapes and drones and things like that. And before that, we were playing in weird tunings, kind of doing the emo thing. But neither of those, people would sometimes ask, can you do an acoustic set, or do you want to do an acoustic session? And I would kind of think about it and say, actually, no, I can't, I won't. And kind of as time goes by, I got into more and more kind of songwriter oriented music and thought about how, even at the most extravagant arrangement of a band like, Wilco or one of these artists, at its core is still a song that you can sing and strum. And that's kind of what the touchstone was for the writing process, not to let myself think, oh, this could be a cool part of the song if I really dressed it up and I got all the reverb pedals figured out and the drums were doing this, that, and the other. That'll be a great bridge. I really thought about and wrote this way, sitting down with an acoustic guitar, just me singing and strumming. And that was kind of the idea. Could I play and sing the song around a campfire and it still be good? Instead of me, hitting a really dramatic note on the low B string of a baritone guitar and saying, okay, and then imagine, these crashes and drum machine and all this, that, and the other, cut the crap kind of, and all the fluff and all the ornamentation, and just, is this a good song or not, was sort of the standard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the healthiest approaches to songwriting. You want to make sure that the song itself is good, regardless of everything else. Like, I can't imagine. I mean, there's certain genres where you probably couldn't do that. I don't think you could really be like, well, how does Metallica sound around a campfire? Like, not
right.
Same.
Heavy music, or even some more classic punk stuff, maybe could have, but like, do you want to hear Black Flag acoustic? Do you want to hear all these various? You're right, and but
I think it can be a good test, though, even for more like technical music, to be like, can I translate this to the most stripped down, like a single instrument, and have it be effective? Like, that can be a good measure. And it's not to say that like, like, is Gent gonna work? Maybe not, but I think even like fairly technical songs, like if you can still translate them to an acoustic instrument or a piano, like that can be a good test of it, to be like, how much of this really does translate? Like, how much of this at its core is the songwriting and how much of it is the embellishments?
Right. And one thing that kept happening to me is I had written a lot of long songs on Proof, on the post-rock kind of album. And as I was kind of thinking about the song, the capital S song and the campfire angle, I found myself editing and paring down and paring down and paring down. So instances where I would have, a 5-minute song or a 4-minute song, I just kept chopping and chopping and chopping, because I was thinking, this instrumental break only needs to really run once, or, this verse was not as strong as that verse, so I'm just going to drop this one. And there's a couple songs that ended up pretty short, despite original drafts or iterations of them being twice as long. So there are songs on the new album that I really cut down, trying to get to the most effective version of the song. That's how you end up with a 25-minute album.
I love a 25-minute album. I think I'm a big fan of the sub 30-minute LP. I think those are some of the most efficient, I guess, use of the time. Or you could use like the writing trope, urgent sounding.
Yeah.
An album can be. Now, obviously, like, not every record has to be like that. Like, some records that are long are served perfectly well by the length of some of the songs, because it doesn't accomplish the same thing. Like I don't think Proof would work as a 25-minute album. Like, it works.
Would have been
much
really
better.
weird. Yeah.
Because it would have been like, oh, it's over already. That would have felt abrupt, like you just finished too soon. So I really like that approach that you've taken to this record.
Thank you.
And I was reading one of the bios you have out there, and it was talking about like all the bands that were kind of influences on this record, like an artist like John K. Samson, Blake Schwarzenbach, and then you threw out like Piebald and like the Wrens, and I'm like, this is like a great list of artists that I'm if I had not known who you were beforehand and I saw that like list of names, I'd be like, well, I'm definitely listening to this to see what it sounds like. So
Thank you. And it's interesting because when someone says, do you think your band sounds like the Wrens? Do you think your band sounds like Jawbreaker or Jester Brazil? I'd say no, definitely not. But the idea of an FFO is a little different than that, right? It's not saying that your band sounds like those bands. It's that your new record will offer things to fans of those bands. It's for fans of XYZ ABC. And that was something that my friend who wrote the bio had to really sell me on, because I was like, I can't go in here telling people that like it's really like Jawbreaker is a band to be thinking about when you check mine out. And he's like, no, but there's things that people like about Jawbreaker. Those people will find something in your band's album. And I was like, okay, you're approved to throw Schwarzenbach in there.
Yeah, it's really big shoes to fill whenever you're sounds like John K. Sampson. Like, oh really? It's like, well, not really.
Yeah, you're really inviting some scrutiny when you tell people that, especially John K. and Blake, obviously.
Right. Like two of the greatest lyricists of their era.
I know.
So what do you guys have planned for support for the record?
Great question. We've got a release show in Richmond the day it comes out, which we've never done before. It's going to feel pretty cool. Proof came out during COVID. Album before that, we did some release shows for, but they were kind of after the fact. So it's going to be funny to be playing the new record kind of the day it's available. But we got Richmond that day. The next day, Charlotte. We're playing a show in DC with Wild Pink a little bit later, and that's going to be a great time. But no kind of crazy touring plan. It'll probably be a little more strategic with getting out when possible. And we're a tiny band. It's really hard to book right now, and where we used to have more success doing kind of longer DIY runs, we did one in the spring of last year and really got our teeth kicked in. It was brutal. It was, the venues we played all the time that didn't survive COVID, and having trouble finding local bands to play shows. And then it's like every social media platform has been throttled. So you can't even really reach the people who follow you or want to hear from you. But it's just a tough time for small bands. And I don't mean that in like a woe is me kind of way. It's just, people like you guys who have a platform and support small bands, it's more important now than it ever has been, just because the state of social media and the state of money and, people doing things with their time is tough. It's tough for small bands. So we'll be out there. I'll get off my soapbox, and then we'll go out there and play some shows to the extent we can.
Yeah, and I think it's just a weird time for live music in general too, because it's not just the small bands that are having hard times. Like we see like huge artists now who are like, well, we got to cancel our arena tour because we booked too big of a place, or somebody like Helmet, who I would say is probably like a middle level band. They're not an arena band. They're not a tiny band either, but they have a following, and even them having to cancel tours, just like, I don't know.
How crazy is that? Like so many bands canceling. And I really think that has to do with just people's discretionary spending being kind of only on essentials and not buying records or tickets. And some of these ticket prices.
Oh yeah.
are getting insane. Like John and I went to see Guided by Voices. And this is not Guided by Voices slander. I'm sure they had no, control over this. And it was like $60 to buy a ticket day of. And I was like, love you guys, but 60? It's just, I think to your point, live music is at a tough spot.
Yeah. That's I guess, everybody's like watching the wallet and figuring out, what they can afford to do. And it sucks, especially for art. That's terrible for art, But.
Yeah. No, that's not the way anybody wants to think about art and patroning art, but stuff.
Well, I think everyone should patron Downhaul and check out the new record. And you can get copies of it from both Self-Aware and
Land. Yep.
Yep. They only have 100 copies, right? That's their deal.
Yeah, Land is primarily Dan, the guy who runs it, makes concert posters, and they're insane. Like if you check out the Land concert posters on his Instagram, like he is one of the premier artists kind of in that space, and he works for huge clients. But he also runs kind of a small indie rock oriented label where he puts out records, and got in touch with him through a friend, and he expressed interest, and we told him we kind of already had this thing going with Self-Aware. Are you interested in being part of it? Maybe, exclusive variant. And he jumped on it and did this really cool kind of reimagining of the album art. It's going to be the special alternate album art for his variant. And that came out great. And just something a little, special for the real heads who might want to own, something a little different than the regular record. But he's awesome, and we've appreciated working with him.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to include links to that in the show notes so people can get a hold of that and hear it when the album comes out on Friday. So everybody, you put it on your calendars. You got 2 days. So
that's right.
Well, cool. Well, let's get into the rest of the show. So premise of our show is we sign our guest a year, and they choose one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk adjacent album from that year to discuss. And I gave you the year 2005, and I feel like you got back to me pretty quickly about what album you wanted to choose for us to talk about. And we'll get into that, obviously. But what are some other records from 2005 that you were considering to talk about?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. So it's funny, I was looking at I've got it up right now, just taking a look so I can really materialize this point I want to make. And maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but when I was a teenager in 2005, a lot of these big records that came out that year that I know a lot of people would be dying to talk to y'all about. And I'm talking about, Fall Out Boy, Panic at the Disco, Paramore. At that point in my life, I was very concerned with who was and wasn't a poser. And this was at the end, 30 Seconds to Mars. These are huge records that came out in 2005. But in my mind, and as inherited from my older sister and the people I hung out with at school, those bands were all for posers. And I don't have a ton of daylight here between those records and the record that I ultimately picked. But there's a lot of stuff here in 2005 that I did love. There's an Against Me record, and probably the main reason I didn't do Searching for a Former Clarity. Oh, wow, there's an All-American Rejects record that year too. Probably the main reason I didn't do Searching for a Former Clarity is because I did an Against Me album with Josh and didn't want to rehash all my Against Me talk. But the stuff that I was into that year, there's a Grapevine of the Music Industry record. There's the Gate Against Me record. There's, some stuff in the kind of like, I don't want to say true punk, but like not as poser corners that I was more interested in. There was Andrew Jackson Jihad. There was a Dropkick Murphys record that I was super stoked on at the time. A lot of stuff that I was kind of listening to from Warped Tour compilations or Give 'Em the Boot compilations, or, other things that were more, I would say, in my mind, punk leaning than the kind of like, there's a Johnny Hobo record I was pretty high on at the time. More true punk leaning than, oh man, Jack's Mannequin that year too. I'm telling on myself a little bit. True punk and Jack's Mannequin in the same sentence. I think you guys get where I'm going. There are these huge records in the kind of like mall emo space that I was not particularly interested in then, but have really been canonized kind of in hindsight by people who I guess did like them then and were not as concerned about the poser police as I really was at the time. And I've kind of chosen one that's like a little bit in the middle there to me. And that's a long rambling answer, but that's kind of where my thought process is and was.
Yeah, I think we may have been in the same kind of headspace around that same time period. I think so. This was 2005. Dylan, had you already started or been part of All the Living yet?
2005? No, I think we started in 2006.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, close to what we were doing around that time period. Yeah, definitely like that mall emo stuff. Not for me and not my kind of thing. Like we would watch like Fuse at a buddy's house or MTV2 and like watch the videos and just kind of like clown on them just because it wasn't like our kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so like going to once I got to college, I guess that's when I started to really kind of like dig into like more of that kind of stuff. But I feel like it even took longer for some of these bigger records. Like for me to really get into Paramore was within the last 10 years. You know, like it's not something that I was into as a teen, really. But
that was such a funny era for punk. Like for it to be so close to mainstream that we like the hardcore, like the metalcore, deathcore, emo, scene core like stuff was active in Hickory, North Carolina, where like I was in a metalcore band and like playing shows, and there's all these like redneck kids with like flat iron hair and tight skinny jeans. Just to think of that in that region and what that region was before and after. It's just like what punk was there before was like really extreme underground, crusty, gutter punky kind of like noise shows in somebody's house and like metal sludge bands playing at like the scary biker bar. And then we have like kids spin kicking each other in an arcade in the YMCA teen center for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then like a handful of people that are just like, you know, still trying to play music that just, you know, live there, and they're like kind of booking maybe, you know, whatever small places still will give local music a chance. It's like, you know, if you're not a cover band, you know, playing a show in a region like that now, it's just like it's pulling teeth to get it to happen.
That number is getting smaller and smaller. You know, people will end up open their businesses or their event spaces to local small bands. But, you know, it is so funny to think about, you know, to me, and like I know that like Fall Out Boy claims Jawbreaker as like a primary influence. And I was like, no, these guys are posers, and they're always going to be posers, and I will never listen to them. I'm here on this podcast to talk to you about Motion City Soundtrack. But I was shocked to look at this list and see the crazy, like, so many huge albums came out that year in the Warped Tour extended universe, because those bands did play Warped Tour. Paramore was on Warped Tour. You know, I don't know.
Katy Perry was on Warped Tour.
I saw Katy Perry, and I was very respectful. Actually, I was like, "This is a catchy song." But
someone I work with, I think she is like a seamster, tailor, like fabric artist. She did something for the Katy Perry VMA performance. Like I think she was part of the team for the costuming for that. She was posting Instagram stories. It's like, oh, whoa, she's at the VMAs. What?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. No, it was just such an interesting time because like all this stuff was kind of being distributed, you know, through Hot Topic basically, and the closest mall to me was not very close, but it did have a Hot Topic, and there's no record stores. You know, where I grew up, there was one, but it closed. So the only place to buy CDs was, I think we had FYE, and maybe Sam Goody turned into FYE. But other than that, you know, you're trying to find stuff at Best Buy or Borders or Barnes and Noble. There was not any sort of specialized. And that is kind of, I remember flipping through CDs at Borders. And first of all, they were like $23.99.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like every dollar you have and then some at that point. Yeah. And flipping and like considering like taking a CD to the little like listening demo station, like based on the band name. Because I just like didn't have a way to discover new music. We didn't have cable, so I wasn't watching MTV or Fuse or VH1 or anything like that. Like my music discovery was like things people told me about, or you know, this kind of backwards way I would buy CDs at these stores. But, and I apologize for jumping the gun, but the way I discovered Motion City Soundtrack, they were opening for Streetlight Manifesto. who was like my favorite band. Speaking of true punk, I was obsessed with Streetlight Manifesto, and they were playing somewhere kind of far away, like DC maybe. I grew up in Stafford County, which is between DC and Richmond. So for shows, we had to go up or down, basically. And one of the umpteen times I made the pilgrimage to see Streetlight, their opener was this band Motion City Soundtrack, who I had not heard of. This is early. This is like, I think their first album was out. So this might have been 03 or 04. But anyway, I see this opening set. You know, they shoot the lights out. They're amazing. Crazy energy. The drummer is unbelievable. You know, there's a ton of charisma, and like they play short. They played like 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, and just like nuked it. They played so well. But for some reason, I like didn't think I should like, I'm going to follow up. I'm going to go to their merch booth and buy something, or I'm going to make a note of this band name. I saw them and then kind of forgot about them until I was at Borders flipping through and the band name jumped out at me. And that's when I bought their first CD, which had been out for a bit at that point. And then, so the first kind of like promo cycle that I was there for, like participating as a fan, was for the record that I did ultimately choose for the pod, Commit This to Memory.
Yeah, I guess we can just segue into the album then, because that's just a perfect setup, and it would be weird to go back and talk about something else. But
sorry, I'm rambling, but
no, that's perfect. So let's get into it. Yes, you did select Commit This to Memory by Motion City Soundtrack.
I am wrecked, I am overgrown. I'm also fed up with the common cold. But I just hate to say goodbye to all the metaphors and lies that have taken me years to come up with. Say it's true, say you like me, just for the night. For me it's been eternity. And as I gently sip this drink, I think about my lack of future and all the places I could learn to fall in love.
And I have a couple what I like to call stats on the band. So Motion City Soundtrack were from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and they formed in 1997. And this is the band's second full-length album. And it was released June 7th, 2005 on Epitaph Records. And the personnel on this album is Matt Taylor on bass, piano, percussion, and backing vocals. Tony Thaxton on drums and percussion. Joshua Kane. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Joshua Kane on guitar and backing vocals. Jesse Johnson on synths and keys. And Justin Courtney Pierre on vocals and guitar. So the album was produced by Mark Hoppus of Blink-182 fame and co-produced by Ryan Hewitt. Ryan Hewitt also engineered Crimson by Alkaline Trio in 2005. So busy man that year.
hot hand.
And the record does feature some backing vocals from Patrick Stump of Fall Out Boy fame. He does backing vocals on Everything Is All Right. And Mark Hoppus also lends backing vocals on Hangman. So some basics out of the way. So for this record, it sounds like this is a case of what our friend of the show, Adam Yo, he's a writer. He's written a lot for No Echo. And he coined a phrase that I don't even know if he's even realized we've used it as much as he said it, but he called it like the ones you wait for. It's like the record that after you're a fan comes out and you're like, oh, I can't wait for this to come out. So that sounds like you were there. You were there for the rollout of Commit This to Memory.
That's an amazing term, and I'm going to use it. So
yeah, it's such a good term, and I don't think he realizes like how much I use it because it's such a great concept.
It is a great concept, and I think so many of us have the one we waited for in our brains because of the way it makes you feel. And it's funny because I would, at that same Borders, they would sometimes have punk mags or extended universe of punk, be it alt press or whatever the other ones were that I can't really remember at the time. But I didn't really. This is pre-social media for me, at least. I didn't really have a way of like participating in album cycles, other than if a band or a label took out an ad in sort of one of these mags that Borders happened to have kind of on time. But I remember them advertising pretty heavily Mark Hoppus's involvement, and I thought Blink-182 were posers. So I was like pretty worried about that. I like didn't really understand what it meant to be a producer, and I had kind of heard like their stereotypical classic rock kind of like the producer came in and ruined the band kind of story, and oh man, like this is going to be bad. He's going to take this band and make them Blink-182. He's going to make the drummer chill out. He's going to make the weird parts go away. He's going to do all these bad things to the band that I'm not going to like. And that was kind of, I don't even think I really knew what the singles were. I mean, I know what they are now, and I've seen the videos now, but when the album was rolling out, I was like pretty in the dark, except for being generally aware of when it came out and that Mark Hoppus was involved. So this being like one of the ones I waited for, it is in such like a rudimentary, like disjointed kind of way. It's not like it would be now where I'd be like checking out every single and video and reading every interview and like diving deep and all that stuff. It was waited for in a very like elementary kind of way.
Yeah, it's such a funny idea to be like, oh, I found this band by reading a magazine, which is like you couldn't hear it. So as you were relying on what a person wrote about it, or at least even more simple as that is like they look pretty cool in that band photo.
That's
maybe
huge.
I'll check them out.
That's huge. So many bands I thought looked cool or uncool. And I think this was like, we're sort of in iTunes era, right? But at least for me, I don't think I had an iPod yet. And it definitely wasn't, for me, full swing of like every Christmas present from an aunt is an iTunes gift card. Oh, my nephew kind of likes music, we're going to get him an iTunes gift card. And you could sample songs on iTunes. And this is, for me at least, was before CD burning or CD leaking really even. I knew it was happening and it existed, but I just didn't have access to it. I didn't know about, torrenting or anything like that. I would eventually get LimeWire and do all these heinous things to the family computer. But at this point, I was still sort of pretty rudimentary in my like music discovery and consumption.
Yeah, it's so funny how even when we came up, it was easier to hear music. Like even before, like people before us, like it was like, how did you find it at all? Like it was even tougher. I feel like because we have some internet access at least, and like some of that kind of stuff. I guess it was really, really relied upon like radio and MTV and a good record store. Like if you had a really good record store with people who like knew how to
seriously,
show off stuff.
To be able to have, I mean, like the 90s, I think of the 90s being like, it's like, how were you guys finding anything that wasn't on MTV? Because there was tons of that stuff. Basically. I mean, all of those scenes exist. All of those scenes built into what became like the Warped Tour alt press, like all of that. It's just like you would have had to have been in the region, or like you had to like hopefully live in a town that had a cool record store and like house shows and you hopefully see a flyer for it, or you have an older friend maybe, or an older relative who's found their way into that to bring you into it. It's just such a we call it older brother privilege. I've got a couple of friends who really got to skip some rough years of music consumption because they had an older sibling who put them on
or an older sibling who like distinctly did not put them on is like a lot of like, no, like I will not let you borrow this. You cannot burn this. You cannot rip this to your library. But no, I think that, you know, I found a lot of bands through, I think a lot of people our age sort of feel this way. Tony Hawk Pro Skater soundtracks.
Yeah.
You know, skate videos, other kind of like, there were other subcultures you could sort of get into that would help you find small bands and small music. But I mean, in towns without a record store and without like people who cared working in those record stores and kind of putting people on and making recommendations. When I was 13, I asked for CDs for Christmas, and my dad went to, there was at that point a record store called Blue Dog in downtown Fredericksburg, which is like the city that we lived outside of. And he went to the cool college kid at the counter and said, my 13-year-old son wants CDs. What should I do? And he sent my dad home with OK Computer, the Blue Album by Weezer, and Elephant by the White Stripes.
Wow. It's a good variety.
Isn't that crazy?
Of different kind of things.
Yeah.
Because of the time period too, it's kind of like, well, 13 probably hasn't heard this Radiohead record or this Weezer record, so
yeah, and it's crazy because like I really didn't like Radiohead. I thought the White Stripes had some stuff I liked and some that was maybe a little much for me at the time, but the Blue Album when I was 13, I'm going with John Russell to see it in 2 days. But yeah, you know, it's just such a strange time for music discovery. And like, I would buy those Warped Tour compilations, and I only went to Warped Tour a couple times. I was not some like big Warped Tour head, but I'd buy the compilations because they were kind of cheaper than a real CD. I'd buy those and hit the whole thing and discover 2 or 3 bands, and then like buy their CD blind if Barnes and Noble had it. Or I'd go to the library and borrow whatever they had and rip it. And I found, you know, I got Loco Live by the Ramones from the library and stuff like that. But you're so right about music discovery. It was such a strange time.
Yeah, because now it's just like, oh, you have like a million ways to get in front of people now. And now you're also fighting against way more names than you used to. But
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Music discovery, like...
Now you're fighting a computer basically to be heard. Is just I need to make sure that some AI, some algorithm that is programmed is going to pick up on my music, and everyone is all trying to do the same thing at the same time and trying to do all of the same moves to game the algorithm. And it's just I appreciate having had or grown up in an era of music where there was a level of work, but it wasn't impossible. Like you had to be invested to do it. You had to remember names and go out of your way to be like, okay, now that I have internet access, I'm going to look up this band that I heard about, or I'm going to go look at Pure Volume and just look for whatever's new.
Whatever's free to download at one point. Whatever was free at the top of whatever genre chart. I remember checking out bands because bands I liked would wear their merch in promos or on stage or things like that. Like, I remember I checked out the Gaslight Anthem for the first time because Warren of Against Me was wearing a Gaslight Anthem zip-up hoodie. I'm sure they would have found me another way, but like the first time I saw that name and checked them out was because the drummer in a band I liked was wearing a hoodie.
Yeah.
Kids these days don't understand.
I know we do kind of sound like old men yelling about, back in my day, it was a lot harder. It's like,
yeah.
Me
So for the record, commit
Right.
this to memory.
Right.
I'm trying to think where we want to go with this. So you kind of told us how you got into them first, so I guess then we could go in our
Sure.
direction.
Yeah.
So when you chose this record, I was like, hell yeah. I have been waiting for someone to choose this record. If someone wasn't going to choose it, we would have chosen it eventually. We definitely talked about it on our 100 and 100 episode where we talked about 100 albums in 1 minute increments. It was like so we talked about it for a minute on that episode.
Yeah.
So I, like you, also bought Warped Tour comps all the time because they were cheaper. Like I remember the first one I bought was probably like $7.99, and then it was like 2
50
CDs.
songs. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's like it's a steal. I can't afford not to. That's kind of my thinking at the time. And I definitely came across the Motion City soundtrack on maybe 1 or 2 of them. I feel like they were on a few.
0405 maybe, if I had to guess. Yeah, it would make sense. Yeah.
I think the 04 one might have had a song from I Am the Movie, and then like the 05 one probably had something from Commit This to Memory. And then maybe the 06 one might have had something too.
Right.
But so that would have been like my first like encounter with that band. And I was always like, this band sounds really cool and really different from a lot of the other bands around.
Yeah.
It's like it's super catchy, but they're doing this thing with a synth that like most of these other bands aren't doing. So I definitely was like really intrigued by that band. And then by the time I went to college, this is during like the iTunes era where you like if you're on a shared Wi-Fi,
oh my gosh, yeah,
you could access everyone's library who had them like unlocked so that you could do it. And so I would just spend hours just like going through people's libraries and figuring out like whose taste in music and everything I lined up with.
And you meet him like in the elevator or in the hallway or something, and you're like, I gotta say, incredible iTunes, man.
And yeah, somebody had Commit This to Memory on their computer. For some reason, it was missing 2 or 3 songs.
Classic. Yeah.
It's like you just didn't like that song, so you deleted it from your computer, I guess. I want to say they cut like resolutions, maybe. I was like, oh, weird. Okay. You're cutting the slow song. I guess you're cutting the slow song, So that was the version, because then there was even another. This is a very specific time period. There was another kind of software that you could download, which would then rip everything that you selected from someone else's iTunes. Like you could just like, you paid for all this and put it on your iTunes. Let me have some of that too.
Yeah.
Definitely did that a bunch.
Oh yeah.
I don't even remember the name of that program, but yeah.
Someone was talking about that recently on, I think probably on Twitter. And I don't remember what the name of it was. There was a brief window where if you allowed sharing of your library through iTunes, you could just take stuff straight from someone else's iTunes, like just over the Wi-Fi. I don't think that lasted very long.
We got a hole to plug, guys. This is a problem. Yeah.
But I do remember doing that a little bit, and I also remember just being like seeing other people's iTunes libraries in college and just like going and finding them. And it was like, oh, you have a bunch of stuff. Can I bring my external hard drive and sit there and just like copy files to each other's computers? Like you can look through mine if there's anything you want,
Yeah.
They never did.
Yeah, so that was how I
don't know what any of this is.
That's how I would have heard Commit This to Memory first, and then like years later, when it became more like the zippy files, the WinRAR files on how you downloaded music, then I got it. The full album, and like, I finally can hear these 2 songs that I'd never heard before.
Yeah.
Which to me,
halcyon days of Blogspot. Yeah.
Which to me, still, when I listen to this album and those songs that weren't on the version that I listened to so much, they feel new to me still. Like, even though like the record is, like, I forgot these 2 songs that I didn't have before. Like I had just listened to the other ones so much, and when you throw in something new into the track listing, it throws it off for you. But
my the burned version of American Idiot I had, the last 2 songs were out of order. So I similarly learned the album wrong. But yeah, okay. So this was not a one you waited for. This was something you okay.
No, this was one that I just came across this album, and I loved it. And then I remember what was it? The next record came out. I don't think I really paid attention to it. I don't think I listened to it. Yeah. And then I do remember giving My Dinosaur Life a listen when it was new, when it first came out, and it just felt so different to me. from Commit
Right.
This to Memory that it didn't stick. And so
Yeah.
they kind of became this band where like I only cared about the one record for me
Okay.
personally.
Okay. So you don't have much history with the first record.
I've come to that in more recent years. Within the last maybe like 2 years, I finally like gave that one a listen, and I was like, wow, this is great. This is like right up
It's
there
crazy.
with
Yeah.
Commit This to Memory. It's just like a super high quality version of the same thing. It's weird that because I have listened to the record that came out after Commit This to Memory, and it just
Even if it kills me. Yeah.
it's solid. I think I
Yeah.
appreciate it more now than I did back then.
Same. I was mad when it came out. I bought that on release day at Best Buy because the record store was gone at that, and I think the Borders was gone at that point. I bought that at Best Buy on release day, and I was mad about the production. It was so shined up.
Yeah.
It was really, and I was kind of cognizant of at that point they had music videos, and then they had like a pretty like protracted rollout for that one, and I was kind of leery of it at that point. But now
Yeah.
I listen back and I'm like, these songs are crazy. These songs are great.
Yeah. Yeah. I even listened, like, eventually, I think I did finally listen to, like, the final record when it came out, and I really liked that. And so I was
I
like,
need to do that. Yeah.
I that's when I think I changed my mind on, like, the other records, and finally was like, okay, these songs are good. They just, like, did some things differently. But
Right.
Dylan, I was going to say, what is your connection with Motion City Soundtrack?
It's funny because we kind of both came to the band independently, which is not often the case.
Yeah.
Sure.
Usually, like, if either one of us would like discover a band, we would show it to the other pretty quickly.
Right.
You know, it was almost simultaneous, you know, to the point where it was almost happening at the exact same time. But like we kind of came, or that we were doing it together, but we kind of came to them separately. And like, I probably would have heard them on the Vans Warped Tour compilations, but like I didn't listen to those as extensively as Justin did. Because he's the one who bought them, so they were his CDs. So like I'd borrow them from time to time, maybe hear them in his car, but it wasn't something that was at my fingertips at all times to reach for.
Okay. Yep. Sure.
So
I know it well. Yeah.
whatever I heard, it didn't make an impact. But my like light switch, you know, flipping moment with Motion City Soundtrack was I was at my grandparents' house for the afternoon for some reason. I don't remember what the reason was, but I was there for an extended period of time, basically just by myself. And like my grandparents were just like around doing whatever. My grandfather's probably like washing cars because that's what he would do. Or he might have been working on somebody's car, and that's why I was there for a long time.
Probably.
But I wasn't there with anyone else, like no siblings, no cousin. My grandparents were just kind of like around.
Sure.
So like I sat and watched Fuse for just hours because we didn't have cable. You know, at that point, we weren't really regularly hanging out with our next door neighbor who had cable, who we would go watch Fuse and make fun of music videos with. So it was still a fairly new experience to get to watch Fuse TV at that point for me. And I remember seeing probably Avenged Sevenfold videos, and like I remember seeing like what's the Coheed and Cambria video where it's like the Ray Harryhausen. It's probably from that record from this same year.
Is that Faber House Atlantic?
I think so. I saw that video and being like, what the fuck is this? This like I didn't. It took me a while to get Coheed and Cambria. But I kind of just like it was almost like a reluctantly watching it because I didn't like most of those bands. I didn't like most of those style of bands at that time. And like, but it felt like I was accessing something that I wasn't supposed to have or like couldn't have because I didn't have it. Like we just couldn't, we couldn't afford cable, so it felt like this secret thing that I was doing. Not that it was like wrong or dirty, but it was just like, like I'm entering a private space because I just kind of like made myself watch it because I didn't like what was on Cartoon Network at the time.
Sure.
So I didn't just watch cartoons. And there wasn't anything else on TV that I wanted to watch, but like I could sit and watch Fuse and just like you get something different every few minutes. And that like and I didn't like most of it, but the music video for Attractive Today came on. Or no, sorry, it was Everything Is All Right.
Yeah.
The music video for Everything Is All Right came on, and I was just like immediately hooked by it. It was just the song, but the video was fun, and he's got the goofy hair. And it was just like, just thinking in that moment of watching this, like, this is like similar to your thinking of like Poser, emo pop punk stuff that I didn't like. I was just like, this is like that, but good. Like, this is what that is supposed to be. It's like, and I was just thinking, like, I shouldn't like this band, but I really like this. And it just had like the song stuck in my head, like, for the rest of the day. It was like the one thing I took away from just hours of sitting and watching music videos on Views and like not liking any of it. But I got this one thing out of it. And then I think Justin probably came home from college, like on a break with the album on his iTunes. And I think I maybe talked to him about it. I was like, yeah, I heard this Motion City soundtrack song. It's really good. And then like he came home and had the album on his iTunes. I was like, got to listen to, 9/10 of it, whatever.
Most of the album. Yeah.
And it was just like, wow, the rest of the record is that. Like, it's just as good as that. And
that's like my least favorite song on the album.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. It's like, I thought that song was like annoying the first couple times I heard it. It's like, that hook is illegal. Like, you can't make that a hook. Like, you can't do that. That's out of bounds. But it's so funny to think about watching hours and hours of Fuse and picking one.
Yeah.
Just like, this is the one that I'm going to be talking about on a podcast 20 years later.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And the whole record is great. Like,
it's insane.
I loved it. And it was outside of our wheelhouse. It was kind of outside of what we allowed ourselves to listen to. Like, we had this marked off, like, we don't go into emo. That's
Posers, all of them.
a foreign land that we don't. But there's just like, this is one good one. And like, of course, like, now I understand like where they're pulling from Get Up Kids. They're pulling from The Anniversary. They're pulling from
Discord Records bands from the like 90s.
Yeah.
The
There's
rentals, the
weird stuff on these records, especially the first two. Like, instrumentally, musically, there's some weird stuff on these records.
Yeah.
And I feel like rain when the words all sound the same and the lifeless corners of this empty frame. Though we feel let down by the same old hard-breathing winter's curses just around the bend. With our hands all tied to the blaze of that inside we are armed and ready to commit this crime. We love that game, but we never play it 'cause we will lose, and we wanna stay where we are, the way we've been for far too long.
I can do a little bit of the backstory on this, the band and the record. So let's do
please.
that. So I mentioned they formed in '97. When I read that, I was like, '97? Good Lord. It took them almost a decade to really take off. But they did the thing where, you just have different members of the band. You cycle through people, and it takes forever to kind of like develop any sort of like following or a consistent lineup. So it's Justin Pierre and Joshua Kane are the ones who formed the group, and they bring people together, and they decide that there's not really enough places for them to play in Minneapolis at the time, which I find very shocking that there weren't enough places in Minneapolis.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe not for the particular style of music
I don't
they
want
were
to hear
doing.
complaints from people that lived in major cities about
Right.
places to play. Yeah.
Right. Like, okay, that's weird. But their idea was, okay, we just need to go out. We need to go tour. We need to be on the road so we can develop some sort of following that way. And so they do that. They go on tour a bunch. They release a handful of like singles and EPs. And then they do a tour with a band called Submerge. And they wind up convincing the drummer and the bass player to join Motion City Soundtrack. So they basically stole their rhythm section.
Tony Thaxton's that good.
Yeah. So they self-release their debut album, I Am the Movie, in 2002. This gets them lots of attention. Lots of labels are trying to court them. They're selling them out of the back of their cars, but they get on enough tours that with other bands that people saw them. So like Universal wants to sign them, and that was the label that they were like leaning closest to signing, but they wound up going with Epitaph just because, it's a well-known label, and punk rock and independent, like a truly independent record label that was actually very popular. And so they wind up signing with Epitaph, and they reissue I Am the Movie in 2003.
Yep.
And then they wind up going on tour in Japan and Europe with Blink-182. And then on that tour, they get pretty close with Mark. Like Mark like shouted them out in like an interview saying like, this band's great, they're really good. And so by the end of the tour, they approached Mark and were like, hey, do you want to produce our record? And he hadn't produced anything before, and he was like new to the idea, but his number one rule was like, I'm not going to do anything to change you. Like, I want you to be you. Like, I don't want to put in like, I'll sit in on the recording sessions. He said he modeled his producing on like Jerry Finn's style, who did like a bunch of the Blink records. And his approach was more like listening and giving feedback and just kind of like talking through, not so much the like, you should play this part, you should play that, like that kind of stuff. Just more of like, don't do that, trim that down, that kind of thing. And I think engineering wise, he didn't really handle much of that. That's why this other guy, Brian Hewitt, gets like a co-producer credit, because I think he's traditionally an engineer. So I think he was really doing all the physical, the hard work of like levels and stuff like that.
Knows how to mic a drum set. Yeah.
Right. So at the same time they're recording the record, Justin is going through some treatment for alcohol abuse. They rehearse and write in Minneapolis, but they were going to record in LA, and Justin goes out early and he stays at Brett Gerwitz's house for like a couple weeks while he goes through like Alcoholics Anonymous. I think Brett has a history of some substance abuse issues, so I think he was probably like, look, I want to help, and be a part of this, getting you better type thing. And so then the band winds up joining him, and then they do the record with Mark, and then like while recording, they get their own headlining tour for the first time.
Wow.
And then they wind up doing like 270 shows by the end of the year, which is like, how did you record an album and like tour that much at the same time?
Took off on federal holidays, basically.
Yeah. And then like also while trying to go through Alcoholics Anonymous and like getting treatment for all this, like ultimately, the alcohol problems continue into the next record. So like maybe being on the road 270 days out of a year wasn't the most conducive way to, get better during that period. But yeah, it was just this like really interesting way of doing a record. You get somebody who hasn't produced an album before, and his whole thing was just like, I don't want to change anything about you,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of a first as far as like a primary engineering credit too for Ryan Hewitt, because, well, I guess he had some more engineering because he had worked on Blink-182 before, but he'd been more of an assistant engineer for several years, and then like 2004 leading up to this, he gets much more engineering, and then he ends up like he is like the main recording engineer on Stadium Arcadium, the Red Hot Chili Peppers record in 2006.
Ever heard of it? Yeah.
And he does like, he's an engineer on an Ava Brothers record, some Flogging Molly later on, a couple of Ava Brothers records. This definitely feels like a prominent record for him though. Like Crimson and this are definitely big steps up for him as an engineer, it looks like.
Well, then they get the big dogs involved to mix, right? This is
Trombino's in there, and Chris Lord Alge, or how do you pronounce
one of the Lord Alges. It might have been the other
Tom.
one.
It's Tom. Okay.
And they split the album down the middle or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact details, but I don't hear it. I don't hear the differences in the mix, which is like kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's weird that like you can have two mixes on this record. I mean, I guess maybe that's where the mastering comes in, and you can kind of like even things out.
Right. Or maybe if you, like we did, stay really truthful to what your band sounds like, there's less of like a treatment going on in terms of mixing. But it's crazy because the album sounds perfect. Like the album sounds, it's not as scrappy as the one before it, and I think they flew too close to the sun on the one after it. But the mix on this album sounds so good.
Yeah, this record just sounds amazing. Like front to back, this whole album. I just love everything about it. Like there's not a single song on this record where I'm like, I'm not a fan of that. Like even my least favorite song on there, I'm like, this is a really good song, Like
song rocks. And it's funny because like it definitely sounds shined up, right? It sounds like there's a budget involved, and you've got the who's who of pop punk singing harmony and backup vocals or whatever, but it sounds like their band. It really does, despite they're talking to major labels, like you said. I mean, it sounds like their band.
Yeah, because they do eventually wind up getting on a major. Like they did. My Dinosaur Life, I think, was on Columbia.
Yeah.
And that was like their one major label record, and then they went back to Epitaph for the last couple. So it's interesting, yeah. That
signed to a major label and then opened the album with a kazoo, and everybody's like, "Is that right?" But I remember I actually had the edited version of this album, and there was some cussing on this album.
What did you think LG Fuad was?
I had, and it's funny because not just that one, but there's instances where there's cuss words in choruses, and this was one of the versions where I guess they just muted it. So I learned all these melodies and I didn't know. I didn't there's sometimes where you're looking and it's like edited version and not. I'm at Best Buy and I just grab it. And maybe they didn't even get distributed the explicit one. It's at Best Buy. And then when I finally heard the unedited version, I was like, oh my gosh, like there are some instances where there's like an F-bomb in a chorus melody. And it's like, oh, that's why that sounded like the way it did, and he was laying down a huge, swear word right across this melody. But this is one of the albums where and there's not a ton of albums I had edited versions of, and it was usually accidental when I did. But I remember hearing the real album for the first time and being like, oh, okay. But I was very relieved that Mark Hoppus did not ruin the band. This was an album that came out at a time when I was pretty heavily scrutinizing my faves, which is another thing, not to make us sound 200 years old, but that was like a thing you did when we were younger. Your favorite band put out a new record and you almost wanted to hate it more than you did like it. You were so skeptical of every move they made and every decision they made, and now it's the opposite. Now it's like, who can compete to love their fave more?
Yeah.
Like the stan culture in pop music right now is like something that I just have never understood and cannot relate to. But when this album came out, I was pleased with it. I was excited, and I loved the songs. I loved how it sounded. And I did not see them live on any tours surrounding this record. I only saw them at that time period open for Streetlight Manifesto. But they're an insane live band. Like, he can really sing the way he sings.
Yeah, I've never seen them live. I wanted to go on this last tour they came through. Maybe it was what year was that? Last year, maybe? A year before, where they did the anniversary for this record. And then I think it was just like too close to COVID, and I was still like not quite ready to go to that kind of thing. And then I think some of them got COVID on the part of the tour, like the beginning part of the tour, so they had like delay dates and like come back around later.
Yeah, there have been like 6 legs of that tour, haven't they?
Yeah.
It's like, wait, okay, no, because there was like gonna be an East Coast and a West Coast, and then there was the COVID cancellation, and they maybe announced some festivals and stuff like that. But I wanted to go too, but I think I was similar to you. My risk tolerance was not quite there yet when it came near me.
Yeah, which honestly, it's still not great for me too. It's just to the point where I'm like, I go to shows now, but I'm just like hyper nervous the whole time. Like, I better not come home sick after this.
I know. I feel that way about, not to devolve into paranoia about health, but anytime I'm in a group of any size, I'm looking around like, which one are you?
Yeah.
But the one time I saw them live, they really do burn the house down. Not to go too close there, but the energy is crazy. He can really sing that way. The drummer is insane. You got the Moog player doing the handstand. It's like they're an insane live band, and they have kind of kept that throughout their career. And I think he might be not playing guitar anymore. I think I saw a picture where he was just standing at the microphone.
Yeah, I read something that was like, I think maybe the most recent tour.
Yeah.
They brought in, actually, I saw who they brought in. It was somebody like I recognized. They brought in someone else to play guitar because he has like a back injury, I believe.
Okay.
And so he's currently like not playing guitar while live.
Yeah.
Don't quite understand. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. I mean, not moving around as much.
It's like alignment wise, I feel like it would be better for you.
Zach Comtois. Why do I know that name? What band is he from?
I don't know that name.
Zach Comtois. I feel like we just like talked about this name recently on the show. Dylan, do you remember? Maybe not. Maybe it's just a similar. Huh. He's like a Grammy Award winning weird. He's played with Keb Mo.
Okay.
Blues group. So weird. I don't know where I'm thinking of, but yeah. So yeah, he's not playing currently. Yeah, I never saw them either. Like I really wanted to, and just I never got a chance to. And then when they probably were at their most active, I probably wasn't even that interested because like I wasn't like super into My Dinosaur Life or Go, So like I was just like, whatever,
And I remember them being on some like pretty big tours. They were on that tour that was like Fall Out Boy and Blink-182 or something like that.
They did the tour. It was like right after this record, I believe. They did a tour with Panic and Fall Out Boy.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah. And I'm not. Those guys are posers, right? I mean, I'm not going to pay big ticket money to go to a show like that just to watch my guys play for a little bit. I'm probably a little bit mad at them for even taking that tour.
Yeah. That was the Nintendo Fusion tour as well. So I'm sure
it was.
I'm sure the branding kept you away too. Like, what? Nintendo?
Yeah. You think I'm going to go to that? No, because I didn't have much interest in. And even though I love the number of big bands, I didn't like going to shows that size because there was a couple, and I think Motion City Soundtrack did a couple tours like opening for big stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they would have come to DC or something. I just didn't bother. There was one that was like a Honda tour.
Yeah, I just saw that. What was that?
Were they on?
It was the Honda Civic tour. With Panic at the Disco and Phantom Planet.
Yeah, I skipped the Honda Civic tour as well. I just and at this point I am on social media and I am following bands I like and checking out what they're doing, and I'm kind of like nah.
Mm-hmm.
But wait, which record is it that Schlesinger is involved with? The next one?
Yeah, it's Even If It Kills Me. It's him. It's a weird group of people. It's like Eli Janning from like Girls Against Boys,
right?
Adam Schlesinger and Rick Ocasek of the Cars. Like they all worked on that record together.
And maybe there was beef or something like that.
Yeah, Justin like said that he thought the whole experience was specifically with Rick was like he said he just confused me the whole time. And they just didn't have a good time, and he had writer's block during that period too. Yeah. And it was just like, it was kind of a letdown. Maybe that's why we didn't resonate with that record, because like he's going through writer's block and then you have 3 producers and one of them's not gelling with the
right. Band. And I remember
one is Rick Ocasek way past his prime.
Right. Like what boardroom was that collab dreamed up in? And like that's such a funny combo because it's like it's very nerdy, right? Like it's like a real like heads no kind of selection of like songwriting like people, and looking back on it now it's like, what the hell, like why did this even happen?
I bet they went with Rick Ocasek just for the Weezer connection, because we know the Rentals were like a big influence on their sound, so that's probably why they wanted to use Rick.
Well, yeah, I mean it makes sense because there is that Cars power pop embedded super deep in Motion City soundtrack. Like,
Yeah.
it,
If
it
anything,
makes
it's
sense,
like,
but
and Fountains of Wayne, I mean, I remember seeing like really nice stuff that Justin said about Schlesinger after he passed, and like he was talking about how it was like a complicated time for him, but like the interactions with Adam were really positive. And it's funny that like those bands are like so much more down the middle than Motion City Soundtrack. It's like Motion City Soundtrack's like the experimental band in the room between like the Cars and Fountains of Wayne, you know, like we're gonna get freaky here, guys. And
well, that's where like Eli Janney would make sense.
Yeah, right.
But
Because he was
I don't
apparently
know
Eli
how much
Janney was.
impact he had.
I think they were friends with Eli Janney before that record too, because I want to say there's something about Eli like recommending someone else. I don't know the exact what it was, but like they were definitely talking with him around Commit This to Memory. So
yeah. And I feel like one of the like going from like Mark Hoppus to those three guys is like so weird and funny. But when I look back, I really like Even If It Kills Me. We're not talking about that record on this pod, but that album, I didn't want it at the time, but when I look back now, it's some really good songs. The production is, again, crazy shiny. And just the way these guys play is so interesting. The way these guys are kind of like the sum of their parts in terms of the individual musicians is a really good example of, you know, the value of being in a band. And I think that's further underscored when you listen to Justin's solo stuff, because you can kind of, which is good, and I like, by the way, you can really discern what his contributions to the band are, not just in his playing and his singing and his writing, but his influences and what he reaches for sonically. You know, you can really tell, like, okay, the other guys in the band, like, it's more than it's more than just, you think about the front person of the band kind of being the vision, but these guys, other guys in the band, really were adding a lot, whether it's the crazy drumming I've mentioned time and time again, or, you know, the synths, which are so uncharacteristic and really do recall Reggie in the Full Effect, Get Up Kids tones and parts, just like these like bright little synth leads. You know, he's not putting down pads or playing chords or playing piano. He's just kind of wee-oo playing like little synth leads. And there's some really weird guitar parts too. Like, this band has some weird guitar playing. I think it's the bassist who sings harmony. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. Let's see, Joshua does backing vocals, and so does the bass player does too. Yeah,
I think the bass player might be the primary backing vocal person, but they really were just like a crazy good band unit.
Yeah, this record, it's interesting because like it's kind of hard to like pinpoint exactly what you would label them as. They got labeled like as emo and like pop punk a lot, but they were also like borrowing really heavily from like indie rock. You know, they mentioned Superchunk being like a huge influence on them sonically,
sure.
which you get. I guess there is a little bit of that like power pop element to this record that you don't really have with a lot of the contemporaries from this time period. Like, everybody else is just going like pop punk.
Yeah.
But you listen to this record and you don't think that's not who influenced them. They weren't influenced by pop punk bands specifically. Like, they were more, like the indie rock stuff. And like, you could call them emo, you can call them pop punk. And I guess ultimately that's where you would kind of put them in emo. But they were just so drastically different from so many of their contemporaries.
The lyrics for me were what, I call those all other guys posers, and they were playing the same shows on the same labels in the same places and had the same videos playing on the same channels and merch sold in the same stores. But there was a maturity that they kind of carried themselves with, and maybe it was from their first 6 years or whatever it was of being a band. Maybe it was because their influences, like you're saying, are more in the indie alternative kind of space. But they just, for me, were, and also probably, I was a teenager and they were not as popular as Fall Out Boy. So I was able to, position myself in a certain way and like them. But they definitely have that kind of, like, when you listen to all the pop punk records of the day, their production doesn't sound like this. Their guitars don't sound like this. Their drums don't sound like this. Like, they are able to sound like real people playing real instruments, but still be really shined up and presented in a way you could put on Fuse or you could have on a Warped Tour compilation. They kind of like split the difference on a ton of different moving pieces and spectrums and levers and things like that. And maybe would be a bigger band if they played ball a little more in certain ways and weren't writing kind of strange parts, strange songs, abstract lyrics. Maybe their career would have been different if they had hired someone else and been heavily produced right at the time it mattered, because it kind of feels like Commit This to Memory would have been their cresting wave, would have been the time to get in while the getting's good. All these other people that I listed off when I was scrolling the list, they sure did.
Right.
And we love this record, but I don't think that it reached the heights that, their contemporaries did.
It is still their most successful record at this point. I think they said like the most recent like verified numbers are like 250,000 copies. It is certified gold.
Cool.
I think Justin says though, like the real number is closer to 500,000. I'm assuming that's probably based more on what they sold too, combined with stores and sound scans and all that kind of stuff. It hit number 2 on the Billboard Independent charts when it came out, and then it was like number 75, I believe, on like the Hot 100. The Billboard 200. That's the album chart.
Yeah.
So like this was their biggest moment culturally. Like this was their peak.
Yeah.
But you're right. I wonder if it was a little glossier, if it was with like, I don't know who was producing those kind of records around this time period.
Yeah.
But would it have done even better, if they'd gone in that direction?
Maybe they were a little older than this is all I don't know this. Maybe they were a little older than some of these guys who were willing to, is Justin older than Patrick Stump? Is he older than Brendan Urie? He feels that way. I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know exactly, but
I wouldn't actually be surprised if they're the same age, because the dude from Hawthorne Heights was like 30 and singing,
I bet he was. Yeah.
Cut my wrists and block my eyes.
Yeah. Posers.
They just knew how to write to their audience, which I think that's probably part of what keeps Commit This to Memory or keeps Motion City Soundtrack from being a band. They had like the artwork of those kinds of bands.
They sure did. Some of those album covers were.
But they're really bad.
Yeah.
A lot of their t-shirts look ugly.
Oh,
really ugly. But they, the songs they don't feel as corny.
They're complex.
Yeah.
They're dense. It's not going to reveal itself to you the first time you listen to it the way a pop punk radio hit would.
And they're not singing about
the
problems that a teenager relates to. They're singing about
who knows
alcoholism.
Yeah, right.
Heavily.
Right.
Anxiety. I think he sings about OCD because I think he's diagnosed with that.
Yeah.
Like mental health issues that Brandon Urie and Patrick Stump are not, singing about that. Though that being said, I looked up their ages. He is quite a few years older than them. Justin was born in 76. Patrick Stump is born in 84. And Brandon Urie's 87. So.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So 76. What does that make him? Almost 50.
He was almost 30 when this came out.
So he was more like the Hawthorne Heights guy.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because his influences are, and also when you get into the system in that way and what you want to do is succeed, you're willing to play ball a little bit. But when you have an identity as a person, as a musician, as a music consumer, and you're a guy who listens to Superchunk and, Fugazi and The Cars and Reggie and the Full Effect, you're going to make a more complicated record.
Yeah, I think they were also like really into like the Promise Ring and Braid and a lot of those like those second wave emo bands instead of I guess are those technically third? I think they're third, but yeah.
someone whom they might have toured with at
Yeah.
some point, maybe.
Probably, like, especially the like late 90s run, like before the first LP.
Okay, yeah. I don't remember exactly, but I feel like they were on some of those shows. But to your point, being he's old enough to have real problems and to probably know it, such as the alcoholism and the he's been doing this band when this record comes out for 8 years already.
Yeah.
He's already fallen in and out of love with it and probably had his heart broken by it a few times. And I'm not projecting here, but probably it's very interesting to think about someone who, so he's 30 when he does this, and he signs to a major label at 35, 6, something like that.
Yeah, whenever that Dinosaur Life record came out, yeah.
5 years later, so he's probably 34.
Yeah, and he comes back to his friend Brett after that, and they're a very interesting, like, there they were opening a Streetlight Manifesto tour.
Yeah.
Which at the time, I mean, now Streetlight Manifesto can sell out 1,500 caps when they feel like touring, but at the time, I don't remember the venue specifically, but it was not big. At the time, it was like you get a Streetlight Manifesto tour offer, and it's like 300 caps or something like that, 500 caps maybe, and there they were. But they, special band who I feel like should still have some good records in them to make. I feel like he could probably still write a song, and those guys can all still play. They do it live.
Mm-hmm.
I bet he could write good songs, and they could make a good record now if they wanted to.
Yeah, they have done some stuff. I was looking up. They wind up breaking up in 2016 and then reuniting in 2019. Like, not very long of a stretch. I guess just needed a break more than anything. But they haven't really done anything new. The only thing that I found, they've done tours. They did a cover of Fountains of Wayne song. They did.
I think they put a song out like last week or something, right?
Let's see. The group released the single "Stop Talking" in August 2024 to coincide with the theatrical release of the 2024 film Dee Dee.
I will admit I have not listened to "Stop Talking."
I have not either.
Maybe I should have as homework for this. I'll check it out and follow up in the email thread. But yeah, I saw on my like Spotify release radar Motion City soundtrack, and I was like, that's got to be a fluke of some kind.
Or one of those. Have you seen these like AI hardcore bands? Like they're just making AI versions of like Earth Crisis songs and like Snapcase songs, and now they're like popping up in people's like playlists because like they follow Earth Crisis.
And they're like, I bet you'd like this Computer Earth Crisis. Actually, I got to see Snapcase for the first time 2 years ago at the Avail Festival they do in the summer here. Crazy.
Yeah, we saw them. We saw them at Fest in the last one before COVID.
Yeah.
2019.
Yeah, that was wild. That was they were so good.
Snare drum sounded crazy.
This record, it's fantastic. Like, it's one of those records that like when I was listening to it, it's one of those albums that like I've heard so many times. I've talked about this on albums in the past where like if it's an album that I know super duper well, like the music doesn't even feel like music anymore. Like I just know it so well.
Yeah, I don't hear it anymore. Yeah.
You can't hear. That's right. That's how I described it. It's like you can't hear the music anymore. You have to like fixate very closely to like actually like pick out things because it's just so embedded in my brain, like how this record goes.
And it's funny because I was like, what am I going to talk about this record? And the answer is kind of just like, I mean, all of it. It's all one. It's all connected. Like the lyrics, the production, the music they played, the takes they got, the tones they got. Like it is. And I think the album is very thematic. Like when you tell me that he's struggling with alcoholism, he's going to AA. Like this sounds, it's like a partying, drinking, hangover. Celebrating like vicious cycle of the lifestyle of someone in their 20s who is, in a situation they weren't prepared for and confronting it basically. And like when the imagery of like New Year's Eve and like New Year's Day, like making resolutions, like it just has that feeling to me. It does feel like somehow they captured that kind of like sentiment.
I don't know if you do this, but when I remember to listen to this record on New Year's Day,
Great idea.
every year I can, because there's the 2 songs specifically about New Year's, and I think they even said that like it's because like it was around when they were recording, I think, and so that's where or writing, maybe more around his writing, because he said like fans have come up to him and said this is like a winter record for me, which it's like a really like super poppy upbeat record, but yeah, content wise, lyrically, it's like not a happy time album.
Yeah.
It has a lot of similarities to like Weaker Than's records, where you feel like the kind of introspection that he's doing in the lyrics, and like even really the way that the instruments sound, like they're brighter and chillier sounding. Like it feels like a record that, yeah, it does feel like there's kind of 2 New Year's records, or two New Year's songs on the record, and it feels like just generally the kind of record where you're like taking stock of your life and assessing, the things that you put value in, and the relationships that you have, and how your actions in the recent period of time have impacted those relationships. Like there's so much like self-assessment and just like processing that he's doing in the lyrics, and it feels not that heavy, like until the end. And like that, like Hold Me Down as an album closer, like
crazy.
I was like, this record, it's super familiar, it's really fun, it's catchy, there's funny, clever lines, like there's just cool, interesting parts where the music interlocks and does these just cool, interesting things, and then it hits that last song, and I was just like, I've never been hit emotionally as hard by this record of that song as I was listening to it for this episode. I was just like, I don't know why, just in like exactly the right headspace to just be like, get to that song and just lean on the counter and stop what I'm doing. And I'm like, whew, man.
yeah, you're so right. And the thing about that song is like, it really is like meditative and like hypnotic, and like, but it is so light. Like all these melodies are so pop, bubblegum and just like pop punk, and like, and the Weaker Than's comparison is really, really good, and not one I had ever thought about, and does kind of play back into this for fans of thing.
Yeah.
I would never tell someone that the Weaker Thans sound like Motion City Soundtrack, and they're not next to each other on Spotify for a reason, but there's like elements of both of them. It's like, you could call both of these pop punk if you wanted to. It would be kind of diminishing to do that. And it is sort of surface level, but like they got all the hallmarks of pop punk. But there's this layer of like sentiment and like emotion, but without being cheap about it, and like kind of cold. Like you said, like there's just something with both those 2 bands that is very like, I don't even know how to describe it, but you're so right about that comparison. And
it does feel wintry. It's the
wintry,
that post holidays where you're just like, well, it's dark super early and I have a few hours of sunlight.
And maybe there's some element of that in the production approach, like temporally, that like 2000s-ish kind of like, we're still sort of figuring out what Pro Tools is going to be, like there's digital stuff for sure happening here. I wouldn't call either of those bands' records like super digital or like overproduced or anything. They still sound good and like they hold up well compared to a lot of stuff from the time period. So it's maybe like I have an Epitaph size budget, but I am a little bit more mature and a little bit older, and I have a little more diverse influences when I get to the studio, and I'm calling on references sonically that are more advanced or, prestigious or whatever, but it is being filtered through the same kind of machine that these like records that now sound overproduced do. Maybe there's something in there with the coldness and the feeling of it all.
He did actually explicitly state John K. Samson as an influence on his lyrics for this record. He did this. John K. Samson, Ben Folds, and Tom Waits were his 3 primary lyrical influences on this album.
I hear Ben Folds for sure.
Yeah, I hear Ben Folds a lot.
I hear Ben Folds for sure. And I never think of John K. as being someone like funny. There's humor in what he writes for sure, but I think of Motion City Soundtrack and Ben Folds both having like humorous moments of like lyrically having these moments that are sort of silly, not silly, but just like clever, I guess.
Yeah,
they have a similar kind of like sardonic, sort of edge to it. John Kay feels like funny and like a humorist kind of like a Canadian humorist, John Kay. A Prairie Home Companion kind of like insanely dry sense of humor.
Is that a joke? I don't understand.
Yeah. Wait a second. Like, are you serious about this? And then but I definitely think of like, am I remembering wrong? This album came out in, you said July?
Yeah. So like this dropped in the middle of summer and you're like, what? That doesn't make sense for this album.
I guess that's why you make Everything Is All Right the single. I mean, but
yeah.
But even I feel like the videos look cold because then like Let's Get Fucked Up and Die, like the video is like walking in the snow in like Minneapolis. So like,
right. No, I am with the people that say this is a cold album for them, and like the drinking references, the New Year's references, like it is very like. It all lends itself together to make me really wish the album art was a little better.
Yeah,
I've got this on vinyl, and making it bigger does not make it better. Trust me.
It makes it weirder because like I like hunted down a copy of this on vinyl because it was out of press for a really long time. I think it's been repressed since then, but I finally got a copy and for a decent price, like $20-$25, not too bad.
Yeah.
And when I saw the artwork on vinyl, I was like, it made it worse. How did you make it worse?
This is one of the albums that like I did the same thing. I was like, I need to own this. Let me get on Discogs and do the work.
Yeah.
And it shows up, and I was like, yeah, that's how I remember it. because in the way it all progressed, we went from having CDs, which it's at least tactile and you can hold it in your hand. And then album art shrunk, right? It got put on iTunes, and then it got put on phones, and then Spotify. And if you're a vinyl person, which I'm gathering that you are, buying a record that you had in iTunes or in Spotify predominantly, and then you get it back and you see it on 12-inch for the first time, and you're like, ugh, okay.
Yeah, there's some records that like, I just had them on like the little image on my iTunes, and then like I finally saw it in real life, and I'm just like, that's what that was the whole time? Like I didn't even know what the image was.
I know. Or like sometimes you'll buy a record of something that came out in that same kind of time period this did, where they really weren't pressing records really, or if they were, it was very limited.
Yeah.
And like, so the album art was never generated for the purpose of being in an LP layout, and it's like pixelated.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I'm like double checking, and I'm like, do I have a bootleg of this, or like, no, it's just like this album that came out on whatever label in 2006 was never intended to be on vinyl, and like the original copy of this album art is probably like 600 by 600. Like it's.
I got a copy of when Lucera reissued Rebels, Rogues, and Scoundrels on vinyl.
Yeah.
Like that was like the same time period, like 06, 05, something like that.
Perfect time period for it. Yeah.
And the vinyl copy, they decided for this record to like crop out all the like the border stuff and just like zoom in on the, like the photo image in there. Yeah. And it is the most pixelated album cover I have ever seen. I was like, why did you do this? Just use the original art at least. You know?
Yeah, it's so funny. I really, really hunted it down. I have one of the actual very limited, it's not worth anything, but Sing the Sorrow, one of the copies of Sing the Sorrow by AFI from when it came out, and it's bad. I mean, it is like pixelated to oblivion. So when they did the anniversary reissue, I bought it again because I had seen that they did get a better or upscaling or whatever, and I could look at it and not be like, ugh.
You got to get one of those cameras that can blow up an image.
Yeah.
Like re-photograph it at a way higher resolution to be able to blow it up.
Or use some AI that can generate the between of all the, but
the real rubbery looking AI upscaling.
Effect. But it is really funny that like this album, like we're talking about, it's so thematic and so cohesive and so like evocative of sentiment, and then you see the album art and you're like,
this is a Warped Tour CD. That's what it looks like.
Yep.
You see
it looks like a T-shirt you could buy at like
Threadless.
Yeah.
You remember Threadless?
Yeah.
I knew this guy in college who, I don't remember how it worked, but you could get shirts on Threadless on kind of like a freelance kind of basis. And he like submitted a design, I guess, and it got put on Threadless, and they paid him like $150. And he was like, I'm rich. I got a design on Threadless, $150. Like, look at me. And then they ended up selling like 10,000 of them or something like that. Yeah, it was like one of the best selling designs ever on Threadless. And he was like pretty like clear-minded about it for being 18 or whatever. He was like, yeah, I mean, I got paid what they said I get paid. I didn't know. Nobody knew, you know. Threadless has the platform and the reach and everything. And yeah, it was like in the Threadless like bestsellers page, and crazy.
Well, I think we've said all we can really say about this record.
100%. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for doing it and choosing such a important record to both of us. So it's really nice to have a third voice talking about how great this record is. Because
I'm gonna go listen to it right now.
It's one of those records too that it's just like you think about the songs and you want to hear them again. Like even though I literally just listened to it today, talking about these songs, I'm like, nah, I want to listen to it again.
Before we go, what's everybody's fave song on the album right now?
Ooh, let's see. Let me look at my track listing real quick.
Or at least top two, or maybe even three. I'm going When You're Around, Feel Like Rain, and Hold Me Down. Final answer.
I'm going to agree with When You're Around. I think that's like just an absolute standout track on here. Make Out Kids, I really love a lot.
Song, yeah.
And I'm gonna go Attractive Today. Yeah.
Okay.
I would definitely say When You're Around. I definitely agree. Hold Me Down as well. That I've always really had a soft spot for Better Open the Door.
Yeah. No idea what it means. Don't need to know what it means.
Yeah.
But When You're Around is one of the ones that had a really convincing edit. It was in the chorus, because I can't stand it when you're around, and it was just gone. It was just kind of like a jerky melody, and I was like, it's a weird band. They do stuff like that, and because I can't stand it, it works. And then the first time I heard it, I was like, what? every time in the chorus, just I can't stand it. I'll find you guys like a YouTube rip of the edited version or something. It really is like it works without it, but when you hear it with it, you can't go back.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's like what? Why did they take it out? It's like, well, they said "fuck" in the chorus.
Yeah, a big one, a
huge chorus. One of the big singles on the record is "Let's Get Fucked Up and Die." Like this.
That was one
and die.
It was like melfed up. Let's get melfed up and I was like, something happened there. But no, When You're Around, I had no idea. No idea.
Well, thank you so much for doing the show with us. Please tell everyone where we can follow you online, all that kind of good stuff.
Downhaul Band, DOWNHAUL, new record coming out September 20th. Yep. Be there or be square.
Yep, 2 days after this episode goes live, so no excuse to not give it a listen. So, all right, well, thank you so much, and everyone else, thank you all. We'll talk to you next time.
Can't wait. Talk to you soon.
To order Punk, call the number on your screen. Rush delivery is available. Remember, this special offer is not sold in stores.